Tonight's speaker is Matt Guebard, is an archaeologist with Southern Arizona Office of the National Park Service. He's stationed at Tuzi National Monument. He's worked in the American Southwest for the last 13 years, and he received his master's degree in anthropology from the Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. His specialties include preservation, management, and public interpretation of the cliff dwellings of central Arizona. His research interests include prehistoric architecture, cultural resource management, and historical development of national park archaeology in the American Southwest. I'm guessing most of you have been to Montezuma Castle at one time or another. Tonight, Matt will share his latest research on the prehistory of the castle with us. Please welcome Matt Guebard.
So, thanks for coming tonight, everybody. Appreciate you guys being here, taking time out of your busy schedules. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'm going to talk tonight about a research project that started back in 2009 and recently wrapped up in 2016 with the publication of a few journal articles. I've been really surprised at the public response to this research project, so I want to share it with all of you guys tonight. What I'd like to do is kind of go from start to finish, so talk a little bit about how we developed some of our research questions, how we reanalyzed old archives and old archaeological collections, and how we worked closely with Native Americans and the collection of new archaeological information, and what has resulted in what I think is an interesting interpretation that presents one possible scenario for the abandonment of the Montezuma Castle and the Castellet sites at the end of the 14th century. So before I do that, I want to kind of put this into a larger context, because tonight's presentation is just one smaller part of what you could think of as a larger research program, which started back in 2008. And that's consequently the year that I started working at Montezuma Castle. And I had been to the park before I started working there. I'd been there as a kid a couple times, and as an adult. And I was always really amazed at the public involvement, the public interest in the National Monument, and sort of the iconic nature of the park. So I was surprised to learn when I started working there that there hadn't been much research done. I think what I expected was for there to be a parallel between the amount of public interest and the amount of money and time and effort that the National Park Service had spent studying the resource. But what I learned was that most of the archaeological research had been done back in the 1930s. So as you guys all know, the science and the sort of art of archaeology has changed a lot in the last 85 years or so. So we have new ways of collecting information, we have new ways of managing and analyzing data. And the art of archaeology, the way that we think about past human behavior and past interaction between humans, has changed a lot. So we wanted to bring our interpretation up to date, and we wanted it to be scientifically defensible. So the way that we have approached that is to ask a couple of questions. That is, when was Montezuma Castle built? How long did people live there? And when and why did they leave? Now those seem like really basic questions, but they're incredibly difficult to answer with archaeological information. Nonetheless, we wanted to ask those questions because those are the framework for how our visitors understand the site. So we get about 400,000 visitors a year, give or take. And no matter who they are, no matter what their background is, or what their level of interest in archaeology is, everybody wants to know how old are the cliff dwellings, and when and why did people leave. So we've catered our research questions to the questions that we know our visitors want answers to. And what we've been able to do to attempt to answer those is to work really closely with universities so that we can essentially recruit really talented people in archaeology, anthropology, engineering, and architecture to help us answer those questions. So, as often happens, as we've gone through this information, we've developed new research questions, and this has gone sort of in different directions, and that's okay. Because again, the intent is to provide all of our visitors with the best information that we can, to provide all of you, the tax-paying public, with with the best information possible. So a third objective to this project has been to try to incorporate Native American perspectives into our interpretation of archaeological data. I think tonight's presentation is a pretty good example of how we've been able to do that successfully. All right, so I want to orient everybody to the National Monument. I'm assuming most of you have been there, right? Raise your hand if you've never been to Montezuma Castle. Oh, shame. Okay. Well, you'll have to go soon. So, Montezuma Castle National Monument was created in 1906. It's the third national monument to be established under the Antiquities Act, but it's the first one to have been created specifically to protect a cultural resource, an archaeological site. It's located off of Beaver Creek, which is a tributary of the Verde River, and it was created to protect what archaeologists call the Southern Snow culture. So all of the sites represent that culture area, which is a collection of similar artifacts and architecture that exists within the Verde Valley, which is in central Arizona, near Camp Verde. So this is an aerial photograph of part of the National Monument. If I had my photograph point out. So if you've been here, you might recognize a few things. Visitor center here, kind of visitor trail here. These are our primary resources, Montezuma Castle and Castle A. So this is a really interesting map that was actually drawn in the 30s. This is what you can see from the visitor trail. So if you're in the real world and you're looking at this stuff, you're facing north. So at the far right, or the east, is the Montezuma Castle cliff dwelling. That's a 5-story, 20-room cliff dwelling built in a natural alcove. It's about 80 feet above the visitor trail. On the very far left there, or the west, that's the Castle A site. We're going to talk a lot about Castle A tonight, but you'll notice in between Montezuma Castle and Castle A, there's all this other stuff, other archaeological sites, all with different labels and different site numbers. So people sometimes get a little confused when they look at this map. There's a lot going on there. But we like to think of this entire area as the Montezuma Castle village for a couple of reasons. One, we know based on ceramic data that the sites in this grouping were probably built around AD 1125, 1150, and that they grew over time, probably as the population of the village grew. But it's also important to think of this as a village because we know that people living at these sites were interacting really closely. So they shared architectural space, they shared resources. Many of them may have been related genetically or through marriage or through clan affiliations. And they saw each other, they interacted every day. So that's important to think about because as I go through the material, I make the assumption that the events at Castle A had an impact on the people who were also living in the rest of the village. Make sense? Okay, so this is Castle A. Again, we're going to talk a lot about Castle A. Just to kind of reiterate the connection between Montezuma Castle and Castle A. You can see this everybody see this right here? That's the very east side of the Montezuma Castle cliff dwelling. So they're about 400 feet apart. They're pretty close. Castle A is everything in the foreground of the photograph. So at its heyday, it would have had about 5 stories and about 45 or 50 rooms. So it's about twice the size of the Montezuma Castle cliff dwelling. So a couple things to point out. So this is level 1, kind of have this long room block, masonry rooms. They're built right up against this bedrock ledge. And then we have level 2, which is right here. You can see there's a remnant of a wall here. Behind that wall, there are cave 8 rooms. And cave 8s are artificially carved room spaces. So the builders actually carved room spaces out of the bedrock with digging sticks or stone axes. Level 3 is right here. You can see there's a cliff dwelling here. There are little cave 8s and niches kind of all along the cliff band here. Level 4 kind of starts right here You have an alcove space, and then you can see there were rooms all across the top. And this is actually sort of a remnant of a wall that's kind of precariously clinging to the cliff face. And up here, on level 5, you have a cliff dwelling. So you have a couple different types of interesting architectural styles, and they're all built right up against the cliff face. So just to illustrate that a little bit better, this is an artist's reconstruction of what Castleton might have looked like when it was occupied. This was drawn by the sort of famous archaeologist Edmund Ladd. He worked at the park in the 1960s, and this is a pretty good representation. It's not, I wouldn't agree with all of it, but there are some interesting things to know. The east and west walls, so this is the west wall in shadow here. They're abutted right up against the cliff face. And then the roof beams are all tied into the cliff face. So the builders actually carved out roof beam sockets and then set the roof beams in. So the dwelling is a part of the cliff. So it's a really ingenious construction. So most of what we know about Castleton comes from Civil Works Administration, or CWA, excavations that were conducted at the site between 1933 and 1934. And the Civil Works Administration was a government program that was enacted during the Great Depression. It's a New Deal era program, kind of like the CCC or the WPA. And it was a short-lived program. The intent was to provide federal money to local governments, in this case Yavapai County, with the intent of hiring as many local folks as temporary federal workers in as short a time as possible. So there was a lot of latitude in the way that the local governments could spend the money, the federal money. So there's a real diversity in the types of projects that were funded with CWA money. So you have the construction of roads and public buildings, for instance, but you also have the excavation of archaeological sites. So Castleton was excavated. Tuzu Pueblo, before it became Tuzu National Monument, was excavated with CWA money. Sites at Casa Grande ruins were excavated. And also, there's one more. Do you have another one? Anybody? Wapaki, that's right, yeah, you're right. Wapaki Pueblo. So this is a photograph showing the excavation crew at Castleton. So these were probably like local out-of-work ranchers or miners. And there were actually 10 folks from the community that were hired for this project. And they were supervised by 2 really young archaeologists. The lead archaeologist was named Earl Jackson. He was a guy that had grown up in Verde Valley. His father, Mark Jackson, was actually the very first caretaker for Montezuma Castle National Monument. So he had grown up there his whole life. And he did one of the first comprehensive archaeological surveys of the Verde Valley. So he was the perfect guy for this job. He hired on a lab assistant named Sally Pierce. You may have heard of her. She published under the name Sally Brewer or Sally Van Valkenburg later on in her life. And they supervised the excavation of the site. So between December of 1933 and April of 1934, the crew excavated 9 rooms at Castleton, and they put in several test trenches around the site. And the intention of the excavation was to find cool stuff for display in the museum, but also the types of artifacts that could help develop archaeological culture area. So the types of artifacts that eventually defined the Southern Sinaloa concept. So after they were done excavating, they stabilized several of the walls within the site. You can see the remnants of some of those here. They also reconstructed several rooms, as was the practice in those days. So this is actually a room that's reconstructed to kind of give folks a sense for what a room at the site might have looked like, kind of a living history sort of thing. And they also built a trail through the site. So they incorporated it into the larger Montezuma Castle visitor experience. So, Jackson and Pierce found hundreds of artifacts at Castle Lane, and their analysis of those artifacts was really important. It helped us to understand the prehistory of the Verde Valley, and again, it defined the Southern Sonoma culture eventually. But one of the really interesting things that they ended up finding was evidence of what they called a conflagrative fire. That's an old-timey way of saying a really big fire. So the evidence for that was burned roof material in several of the rooms. So their hypothesis was that the fire was so large that it caused Castle to sort of implode on itself. So remember a couple of slides ago, I mentioned that Castle was connected to the cliff. So they thought that that fire caused it to detach from the cliff and then collapse. So they also hypothesized that the fire had occurred long after the abandonment of the site. They based this off of stratigraphic evidence, particularly the presence of 2 to 4 inches of sediment, what they call lime dirt, on the occupational floors, but below the burned roofing. So their theory was that the site was abandoned because no one was living there. Sediments accumulated within the rooms, and then the site burned. And all of that architectural debris and burned roofing fell directly onto the sediments. It's a pretty straightforward hypothesis. It makes sense, but it's very simplistic. So, one of the things that I wanted to do was to try to refine the hypothesis a little bit, to look back in the record and see if I could figure out just what Jackson and Pierce were seeing as they were excavating, sort of test their ideas. So luckily, they took a lot of really good photographs of the site, almost on a room-by-room basis during the excavation. A lot of details in there. So this is one of those photographs. This is room 3, which is on the 2nd level. So this is after they've excavated. So they've dug down to the floor surface, so this is the floor surface here. And this is all the stuff that was on the floor. So they got brownstone here, and you have burned roofing. So that's pretty cool. This is room 5. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on here. So again, this is the floor, so they've excavated down. This is a Russian mud wall here, a column wall. There is a couple of whole vessels. This is a hearth. This is what they call an adobe oven. I don't know what that is, but it's cool. And there's some brownstone here. So there's a lot of interesting details in the photographs. And if you look through them, you get the sense that perhaps what they were seeing was not quite what they were interpreting. So the archaeology was perhaps more complicated. Okay, so what I wanted to do was to go back through their notes and kind of, again, try to figure out what it was they were seeing. So we kind of broke it up into a couple categories. First, I looked at sediments, or their description of sediments. There were no photographs of the sediments, there were no maps drawn, so it was just what they said they found. And in fact, you can see in several of the rooms they did find 2 to 4 inches of sediments, but they're all described differently. So there's maybe different materials described, and the mechanisms that deposited those sediments is different. And if you look at the field notes and all of this information which was taken from the final reports, it's not always consistent. So what that probably means is that the stratigraphy was really complicated. Maybe they had difficulty interpreting it. The second category here is evidence for burning in the form of burned roofing material. And they found evidence of that in 6 of 9 rooms. So that seems to support their hypothesis of a conflagrative fire. And then the third category here is floor assemblages. We looked at those a little bit, but it's worth noting, you can see some of the rooms had no artifacts on the floors. Some of them had just ceramics or groundstone, and then some of them had lots of stuff, ceramics, groundstone, and small portable tools, bone tools, stone tools, things like that. So taken together, again, what I think this indicates is that the archaeology at the site was a lot more complicated than what was presented in that 1930s report. So it wasn't just a post-abandonment fire. There's the likelihood that people were actually living at the site, and the archaeology might show that. Make sense? Yeah, cool. Okay, so we wanted to figure out a way to just date the fire. That seemed to be the easiest way to try to sort of refine this hypothesis. So we looked around at the site for evidence of burning, and a lot of that evidence, burned roof material, burned ceramics or artifacts, that had all been removed with the excavation, right? And a lot of the architecture at the site had been changed over time. But what we did find was this area of burning on the east side of the site. So you can see it's outlined in yellow. And it's sort of this darker color, right? It's a gray color. So it looks like it's been subjected to fire or smoke or something. The reason that the surrounding cliff face looks different, you don't get a sense of this in the photo, but this area is kind of inset. So it's protected from the weather. So it's not eroded. So if we zoom in, you'll see to the right of the north arrow here, we have some masonry. And around that masonry we have mortar. That mortar is a reddish brown color. I'm not good with colors. But it's reddish brown. And it kind of has this grayish rind on it. Can you guys see that? So that means it's been oxidized. So it's been subjected to a lot of heat. So what's good about that is that makes it a candidate for what's called archaeomagnetic dating. So I called my friend and colleague, Mr. Tom Wines. He's a famous archaeologist, worked at Chocolate Canyon, and he's really the sort of quintessential field archaeologist. So he came out and he helped us to collect archaeomagnetic samples. So the way that archaeomagnetic dating works, using Castle A as an example, is that reddish brown mortar that I showed you contains naturally occurring magnetic iron. So at the time of the fire, that mortar was heated to a really high temperature, about 600 degrees Celsius or 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take. And when that happened, that magnetic iron in the sample kind of went into a state of flux. And on cooling, it aligns with the direction of magnetic north. Now, magnetic north changes over time. Scientists have a record of that change called a virtual geomagnetic pole, or a VGP. So, by comparing the orientation of the iron in the sample with the changing direction of magnetic north over time, you can get date ranges for fires. So, what Mr. Tom Wines is doing here is he's encased little bits of that burned mortar in these white plaster cubes, and they're stuck to the wall, right? So then he measures the orientation of the cube on the wall, marks that down, and then he removed the cubes from the wall. So there was a little bit of that burned mortar inside the cube, so its orientation on the wall was preserved. Make sense? Then they send it to a laboratory, and they go through an analysis process where they measure the orientation of the iron in the sample, and then you get date ranges. So we took two samples, one in 2011 and one in 2013. We took them from the same spot, that area that I showed you outlined in yellow. And this is what we ended up with. So all this stuff over here, you don't have to worry about that. These are the sample numbers. So the top one, this is the 2011 sample. The bottom one is the 2013. what we're interested in here is the date ranges. So we went off what's called the Wolfman curve. That's the VGP, that's the record of changes in the direction of magnetic north over time. So for the first sample, we got 3 possible date ranges. For the second sample, we got 1. So if we put those together and look at the overlap, we can say with some certainty that the fire at Cassoulet will likely occur at the end of the 14th century. Everybody still with me? Cool, okay. So, sorry. That's really good news for us because we knew, based on Jackson and Pierce's analysis of decorated ceramics at the site, that people were living at Cassoulet at the end of the 14th century. So we knew that because, of course, decorated ceramics have date ranges, which they were manufactured and used. So what I was able to do is go back to the Western Archaeological Conservation Center, called WAC by its acronym, and look at all of the ceramics that had been removed from Cassoulet, particularly the late dated decorateds. So everything that was manufactured and used after about 1350 or so. So this is just a little graphical representation of kind of what was found. So these are, you guys might all know this, but these are type names. So these are the ceramic types. They're typed by the material they're made out of and the decorative motif of the design. Under that is the date range. So that's the manufacture and use date. And that's just shown in a black line on the right as well. The archaeomagnetic dates are on the bottom. So those are both of our samples, which you guys just looked at. And the little gray box shows the overlap. So what that indicates again is that people were likely living at Cassoulet at the time of the fire, but if you look at the archaeomagnetic dates kind of overlapped. Specifically, you can see that the date range, what I'm proposing for the date range for the fire at Cassoulet is between about AD 1375 and 1395. Okay, so just to recap, at this point, I'd gone back and looked at all of the old archival information, had looked at the ceramics originally collected from the site in the 1930s, and then also collected archaeomagnetic samples. And all of those things together seem to suggest that the site had burned between about 1375 and 1395 while it was occupied. So there are 2 basic scenarios that might explain fires in the archaeological record. And it's worth noting that in pueblos, fires are pretty common occurrences. So if you ever read an excavation report for a pueblo, there's always 1 or 2 rooms that have burned. Often they're abandoned or they're renovated and reused and might burn again. So it's something that happens frequently. So the first possible scenario is that those fires can be accidental in nature. Accidental fires can be caused by the ignition of the dry wood roofs. So within a lot of rooms, there are open hearths. Those hearths throw off sparks. They can light stuff on fire, right? Another scenario would be for an accidental fire, would be the spontaneous combustion of agricultural stuff stored within the rooms. That can happen as well. But accidental fires are usually small in size. They'll burn 1 room or maybe 2, but it would be unlikely for an accidental fire to burn an entire 50-room pueblo. So another possible scenario would be that the fires were intentional. And intentional fires can be larger in size, particularly if the intent is to burn the whole site. But it likely requires fuel loading. So if you want to burn a whole pueblo, you probably have to collect fuel. You have to strategically position it, and then you have to light it. And you might have to use accelerants, like pine pitch, for instance. So there's 2 kind of explanations for intentional fires. One is that they could be ritual fires. So Cassoulet could have been burned as it was being abandoned and the people were leaving. Maybe they burned it down as a closing ritual. That's possible. Another possibility is that it could be associated with violence. So it could be an arson event. So I wanted to look a little more at the intentionality of the fire, but going back into the archival information and looking at what Jackson and Pierce found. So they found some pretty interesting stuff. In room 3A, which is on the first level, they found an articulated human skeleton that was lying directly on the floor. So that means a full skeleton, all of its pieces and parts lying on its back on the floor. And on top of that skeleton was burned roofing. So this indicates that person died possibly as a result of the fire. So maybe they died of smoke inhalation, or the roof fell on top of them. But it's also possible that this person died as a result of violence. Maybe they died in a room and then the fire sort of burned around them. So interestingly, Jackson and Pierce also found some evidence of violence at the site. So they excavated a mass grave on the west side of the site, and they found the mixed remains of several individuals. And 3 of those individuals they found full skulls for. All 3 of those people were probably male, and they all had evidence of having been killed by blunt force trauma to the head, the type of injury that would be caused by like a club, for instance. So they had cranial fractures. Now they also had evidence of cut marks on the backs of the skulls, so kind of here, the type of injury that would be caused by like an edged weapon, like a knife. And I think most importantly, they also had evidence of burning. So on the interior portion of each of the fractures, on each of the 3 skulls, there was evidence of the singeing of live bone tissue. So what that indicates is that these people were killed in violent ways, but that their remains were burned in the fire. So that connects the Castaway Fire, noted by Jackson and Pierce, with evidence for violence at the site. Make sense? So at this point, I have to admit, I was a little bit freaked out. I had never been a part of a project where the conclusion was that people had died as a result of violence and fire. So I wanted to figure out how to interpret that, but how to interpret it appropriately. So I talked to a lot of other archaeologists. What I think I really wanted was a different perspective. So I went to the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office, and I kind of gave them the lowdown, and I asked for some help, and they sent down some gentlemen from Second Mesa, and these were guys that had a connection with the Montezuma Castle and Castaway site, so they traced their ancestral lineage to the people that built the site. So they came down, I presented them with basically the same information that I'm giving you, and I asked them, could you help me to interpret this? What do you think about the archaeological data? And they said, well, we have a story about that. And the story is that Montezuma Castle was attacked, and part of it was burned, and that the survivors went up into the Montezuma Castle cliff line, and they were trapped up there. They were besieged, and when they were up there, they could look down and see their attackers. And the attackers tried to get them out by shooting flaming arrows up into the cliff dwelling to try to burn them out. And they were up there for some period of time, and eventually they ended up escaping without the attackers knowing. They headed north, and eventually they ended up on the Hopi Mesas. So that's a really interesting story. That's sort of an eyewitness account of what Jackson and Pierce were seeing in the archaeological record. That doesn't happen very often in archaeology. So before these gentlemen left, I asked them, does the story talk about who was responsible for the violence at the site? And they said, yeah, the story says that the Apache were responsible. So that's really interesting, because archaeologists are taught that the Apache were not in central Arizona at this time. So the very next week, I went to the Yavapai Apache Cultural Resource Office, and I kind of did the same thing. I presented some of the folks that worked there, presented them with the same information. And I was careful not to tell them the Hopi part of the story. And I said, what do you guys think about this? Can you help me to interpret this information? And they said, yeah, we have a story about that. And so the story is that ancestral Yavapai and ancestral Apache people banded together over a land dispute, and they evicted the people who were living at Montezuma Castle, and they used fire and violence to do it. So that's really interesting because you have two perspectives to the same event that's noted in the archaeological record. Again, that doesn't happen very often. So, I want to take a second and talk about maybe what this means. In the case of this project, oral histories have been really important part of how I was able to interpret this information. The oral histories, in a lot of ways, they validate the archaeological information and they strengthen the argument for fire and violence at the site. But for me, they also kind of put a human face on the story. So before I knew the oral histories, these were it was just sort of an exercise in reanalyzing archives and archaeological materials. But this actually makes it an event. So after I heard the story, I realized this was a thing that happened. This affected people. So that's interesting in some ways because it sort of makes you think about how a story like this could affect groups of people, how passing that story on from generation to generation could affect the creation of people's identities, how they think of themselves in relation to other groups, right? And how they think of their place on the landscape. And that's maybe a presentation for another time, but it's interesting to think about. So even though in this case, oral histories have been a big part of interpreting the information, archaeologists haven't always been willing to use oral histories as a record of the past. There's a couple of reasons why that might be. Oral histories often don't have any time depth. So what I mean by that is the oral histories often don't start with 600 years ago, something happened at Montezuma Castle, but you don't know when the thing happened. And there's no time depth in the sense that there's no time between the events of the story. So for instance, in the the Hopi version of the story, there are people trapped in the cliff dwelling, but you don't know how long they're up there. And it doesn't matter. The intention of the story is to share allegorical information. It's to pass on information about what it means to be a part of that culture, or something else. So it's not really, the intention is not to tell a story that is historically accurate. However, you can use pieces of this information to tell stories. I should mention too, a lot of oral histories also have side stories about supernatural beings or people that perform magic. So archaeologists have been reticent to use oral histories for those reasons, because that doesn't always fit with the sort of linear way, the scientific way that we like to think about time. But over the last maybe 25 years or so, there have been a number of archaeologists, many of them that have worked or work here in Tucson at the U of A, who've thought about oral histories and have concluded that you can get information about the past from them. You just have to be careful about the pieces of information that you take. So, using this project as an example, there's some little nuggets of information that we can pull from the oral histories. One is that this sort of challenges older archaeological notions, particularly of when Apache and Yavapai ancestors were in the Verde Valley. And it suggests that the Verde Valley was a multicultural and maybe a multilingual area, which is something that I think past archaeologists have thought about, but hasn't really been discussed in much detail. So it's worth kind of going over that in maybe a little more detail. So, in the case of the Apache, most archaeologists would tell you that the Apache probably didn't arrive in central Arizona until the 16th century, and that's based on a couple of lines of evidence. First, the Spanish don't record running into Apache people as they're going through the state, but as most of you probably know, the Apache were not always good at describing people accurately, or places for that matter. Also, interestingly, there are oral histories that talk about from the Apache perspective, talk about Apache people seeing the Spanish. So it's possible that they saw the Spanish, but the Spanish didn't see that. Similarly, another line of evidence would be that archaeologists have not agreed on what constitutes prehistoric Apache material culture. So they can't agree on the stuff that ancestral Apache folks might have left behind. But if you've ever worked at Apache sites, you know they're really hard to find. Apache are known, protohistoric and historic Apache are known for having kind of a light footprint on the landscape. They often reuse objects from other types of sites or earlier contexts, so they can be very difficult for archaeologists to identify. So it is possible that the Apache were in this area during the 14th century. And there's been a lot of discussion about that in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years. And there is a growing consensus that the Apache were probably around earlier than archaeologists had previously thought. So that idea, I think, is going to change in the future. I should also mention there are oral histories from the ancestral, or from the perspective of ancestral Hopi people that talk about Apache folks. One of the stories that I heard was in the Hamaladi villages in northeastern Arizona. There were groups of folks wearing buckskins that came through the villages when they were occupied in the 13th and 14th centuries. And as the story goes, they made all the people in the villages really nervous. So the village leaders went out and talked to them and convinced them to go south to the Verde Valley, where there was more water and more hunting potential. And as the story goes, that's where they ended up going. So another thing I mentioned that I think is interesting is that even though archaeologists disagree about oral histories, we're not the only ones. And if you talk to tribal folks, for instance, you may get different interpretations of what oral histories mean. And in the case of Hopi, for instance, you may get entirely different oral histories based on the person's clan affiliation or what village they're from. So oral histories can be a bit of a landmine when you think about interpreting the past, but they can be useful too. So just to touch on the Yavapai as well, archaeologists in the past have thought about Yavapai presence in the Verde Valley during the occupation of Montezuma Castle. And there's been archaeologists since the 1950s who have kind of kicked around this idea. There is maybe some evidence of prehistoric Yavapai material culture in the Verde Valley, but again, that's a little contentious, and those ideas may change in the future. There are both Hopi and Yavapai oral histories that talk about connections between ancestral Yavapai people and ancestral Hopi. So, for instance, there are Yavapai stories that talk about Yavapai villages on the outskirts of pueblos like Tuzu Pueblo, and a lot of interaction between the two groups. Similarly, during the work that we did, the gentleman from Second Mesa told us that they consider Yavapai people as their ancestors as well, which is really interesting. So what that kind of indicates is maybe there's some intermarriage between the groups. But it can be hard to sort of make sense of this. So if you look at kind of how we think about modern tribal groups, and if you try to compare that with ancestor groups in stories, and then if you try to compare that to archaeological culture areas, there's not a one-to-one correlation there. They're not the same, they're different. But oral histories can be important sources of information, and they can be sort of nuanced forms of information that can be used to understand these connections. So in the case of that Hopi story, that can be a good starting place to try to think about the connections between Hopi and Yavapai, for instance. So oral histories are really useful for archaeologists. You just kind of have to think about how to use them appropriately. So, over the last couple of years, I've given several versions of this presentation, and I always like to end with the same couple of questions. They're sort of rhetorical questions, but I think they're helpful to kind of put all this in context. So the first question is, how does the National Park Service interpret an event like this? This is a pretty heavy thing, right? It talks about violence. And as you guys all know from being at national park locations, we like to present visitors with a lot of information. What type of clothing did people wear? What types of crops did they grow? You know, where did they live? That type of stuff. So how do we create an interpretation that's balanced? One of my fears has been that this story will eclipse all of that other important information that we want to give our visitors. So I don't have the answer to this question, but I think what we try to do is continue to work with Native American groups to try to create interpretations that are appropriate, but that also tell the whole story of a national monument, because the reality is what I presented tonight, that's just one tiny little blip in this story, right? That's a day or a couple of days. And there's this whole other several hundred years of history before that. So this event doesn't define the national monument. It's not everything that we want people to know. There's a lot of other stuff. So the next couple of years, we're going to be redoing our museum exhibits, and we want to make sure that tribal people continue to help us to interpret those stories. The second question that I'd like to ask is, how do we make this information relevant to our visitors? Relevancy is a big deal in National Park Service interpretation. We want you guys as the visitors to feel like you can connect with the information on a personal level. There's a lot of opportunities for that here. So there's a lot of different stories sort of encoded in this one. So there's, I don't know, for instance, some connections between living Native American people and ancestors. That's an important story. There's a story about conflict between different culture groups. We can all relate to that. We see that on the news every day. That's a basic part of the human experience. And then again, there's all these other stories that we want to tell. So I guess the point of this is to say we're not anywhere near interpreting this. We're still trying to figure it out. We're going to certainly take our time in doing it so that we get it right for all of you, the wonderful tax-paying public. So before I close out, I just want to say a couple things. This was really a collaborative project, so we worked a lot with Native American groups and a lot of other archaeologists and other Park Service folks. This is just a couple of people that helped out with the project. There were a lot of other people that were really helpful. We couldn't have done it without all of these folks' help, so I always like to recognize them. So with that said, if you guys have any questions, I'll take them now. Yes, sir.
Is there any concern about the geology above the ruin at Montezuma Castle, it possibly damaging it? It looks like it's pretty fragile material.
So it is, yeah. It's called limestone, but it's a really soft material. You can scratch it with your finger and it falls apart, which is why they can create cavates in it. And there have been rock falls in the past. There were big rock falls in the 1930s, I think, were the last ones. So it does happen. We haven't had any as long as I've been there, luckily, but that is a possibility. There's not really much that we can do about it as far as we can't predict when things will fall. So our strategy has been to just document the site as best as we can. So we've been using newer technologies to laser scan the site, for instance, and we keep really good records using digital photography of what the site consists of. And then all of this research feeds into that as well. The research is documenting the site so that if, God forbid, someday it's destroyed, we have a record of as much information as we've been able to collect about it. Yes, in the back there. Yeah.
The oral history suggests the last occupants were evicted and fire was used in the process. Is that inconsistent with the observations of sediment below the charred roof remains? And how is that reconciled?
So I think there are a couple of things. When we looked at that chart, there were 2 rooms that didn't have sediments in them. those rooms also had what we might call de facto refuse, or they had the most diversity of stuff on the floor. So they had ceramics and ground stone and portable tools. And also the one room that had human remains, that room also didn't have sediment in it. So I think what you have is you have a lot of different things going on in each room. Some of the rooms may have been abandoned. One of the rooms was clearly used as a trash dump while people were living there. And then 2 rooms, I think, were occupied. And that's pretty common if you look at archaeology in pueblos. Often what you have is each room has a different history. Some rooms may be abandoned, while right next door you may have people living in those rooms. So that seems pretty typical. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yes?
Did the oral histories provide any insight into the reason behind the violence, for instance, a revenge motive or resource competition?
Not really. They just said a land dispute, whatever that means. The thing about oral histories is often they don't have a lot of detailed information in them. So we would like to have lots of details about all the things that caused the event, and it's often just sort of an overview of what happened. So that's all. There may be additional information. It just wasn't shared with me. Yes.
You mentioned that on one of the skulls there was cut marks at the back, indicating that was a form of violence. Was that possibly scalping?
I don't know. I think the important part of that is it indicates that those people were subjected to some kind of violence, and that it's all connected to the fire event. Yes, sir.
You didn't say anything about Montezuma Castle itself. How does that fit in chronologically with Castle Lake?
So we think that they were built at around the same time, so the construction probably starts at both sites at around the same time. That may change. We have a project with the University of Arizona that's kind of trying to understand when both sites were built. But we think both were built around the same time, that they were occupied for the same time period. The oral history suggests that both of the sites were abandoned after that fire event. So we've sort of taken that late 14th century abandonment date at Castle Lake and just transposed it onto Montezuma Castle, which I think makes sense if you think about the event at Castle Lake. They're only 400 feet apart. The archaeological evidence suggests that Castle Lake was just sort of left as a burnout ruin. It seems really unlikely to me that part of the village would continue to live in the cliff dwelling when they have the site of a really traumatic event right next door. Yeah, Matt.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I was wondering, you had mentioned that there was possible builders' hut locations right next to Castle Lake. Now, beyond the ceramics, is there any evidence for dating in relation to contemporaneous building of Castle Lake and those builders' locations?
And the other sites on the cliff, you mean?
Yes.
No, so right now it's based primarily off of the decorated ceramics, and that's because most of the information that was available to us had been collected in the 30s. One of the things that we've tried to do to get other dates for the construction of the dwelling, we've tried dendrochronology, which is tree root dating. That hasn't been successful in part because most of the species of the wood inside Montezuma Castle, for instance, are all riparian trees that don't have ring variability, so they come back as what's called complacent, so that you can't date them with dendrochronology. We've also started to try using radiocarbon dating for some of the architectural elements, so some of the wooden roofing at Montezuma Castle. And we're sort of in the preliminary stages of that. So a lot of those other sites, they don't have much dating potential because they're not in as good of a state of preservation. So the materials that we might use to date them, they don't exist anymore. They've been destroyed a long time ago. So the connection between some of the sites, that's sort of an assumption that we make just based on the placement and the site type, if that makes sense. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Were you a little bit surprised that these oral histories or oral stories hadn't been collected prior to your time? That surprises me a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. So, just to reiterate kind of what was said at the beginning, there hadn't been much research that had been done in the 1930s. And I think the archaeologists working at the site in the 30s weren't so interested in collecting oral histories. They had other objectives. So the fact that there was 85 years where there wasn't any research, it doesn't surprise me that nobody thought to collect those stories. I should say there are a couple of publications. There's one sort of popular publication that was kind of a travel book. It just briefly mentioned the possibility of this story. I think they got it from one of the Apache representatives, but it's not described in detail. And there's another project that was done by Desert Archaeology back in 2007, and again, the story is sort of alluded to. So it's in the literature a little bit, but nobody really ever follows up on it. It's just like a sentence or two in the project reports. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
What are the scientific and ethical procedures for collecting oral history, indexing it, and protecting it as well?
So what we did was we were really honest with the participants about why we wanted to interview them and the type of information that we would collect. We had them sign a waiver and we recorded our discussions with them. Once we did that, then we transcribed that information and we sent them copies of the interviews both in tape form and transcript form. And then we asked them to go through it and redact any information that they didn't want us to talk about. Additionally, when we went to publish this information, what I did is I sent copies of what I was going to put in the papers and again asked them to review it and redact out any information. So try to be really careful about making sure that we weren't going to publish anything that people were uncomfortable with. Oftentimes, I think because we were honest with these groups, they would have discussions amongst themselves where we would either walk out of the room or they would speak in Hopi, for instance. So they would talk about stuff and they would only share what they wanted us to know and the information that they were comfortable with us publishing. So we were really careful with that. We have copies of all that information at the park. But if somebody, for instance, outside the tribe requested that, then we would be careful to make sure that the tribes knew that somebody wanted that. And so all of our decisions surrounding releasing this information is getting vetted by tribal members. Yes?
I missed the part about who were the inhabitants that were evicted, and do you have a year of what time that eviction was?
So I think those are ancestral Hopi people. And the time for the fire that we think caused the abandonment was between 1375 and 1395. Yes, sir.
Given the proximity of Montezuma's castle to Castle A, do you have evidence for a similar burning event at Montezuma's castle?
So we have evidence of burning inside of the site. So I should have put a photograph in here. So you have, the way that the roofs are constructed is you have what are called primary beams, which are the main beams that hold up all the weight of the roof. And then you have secondary beams, which then hold up all the stuff that closes the roof off. So there are several locations, I think there's about 9 or 10, where those beams are burned on the upward side of the beam. It's kind of a cup-shaped burn. They're really interesting. There's been a lot of archaeologists that have tried to explain those, and there's not really an adequate explanation. One of the things that we did as we were talking to tribal groups was that we showed them photographs of those burns, and we said, what do you guys think about this? And so the Hopi representatives, for instance, said that's evidence of fires caused by flaming arrows that were shot up into the site. I don't know if that tracks real well with what would actually happen because those beams are inside of the rooms, so it might be difficult to burn them. But that's really the only evidence of burning that we have. I should mention too, at WAC, in the Castle A artifact collections, there is one burned arrow main shaft. Again, I don't know if that's associated with the event. It could just be an arrow shaft that was burned as part of fire. It had nothing to do with this story. But those are sort of the only pieces of evidence that sort of support the story. Does that answer your question?
I was just wondering whether there was any evidence for this siege, if you will, extending over to Montezuma's castle, given that they're only 400 feet apart.
Yeah, I think that would be the only evidence, those burns inside of Montezuma Castle. But again, that's really inconclusive. There can be a number of reasons why those burns might have occurred. One of the things about Montezuma Castle that should be mentioned is that it was a really popular place for people to visit, beginning right around the time of the Civil War. And from the 1860s until the National Park Service took over in 1916, there was really sort of unchecked visitation inside the dwelling. People could do whatever they wanted. So as a result, a lot of the archaeological evidence that we might otherwise get from the site, floor features or maybe other evidence of burning, that was all destroyed. It was either looted out or it was ground to dust by the number of visitors that walked through there. So in some ways, we're kind of constrained by the amount of past damage that was done at the site, unfortunately. Yes?
Spaniards, Mexicans, and Americans all had trouble telling Yavapais and Apaches apart. What's your sense of, do Hopi distinguish between the two?
I think so. There are several stories that talk about ancestral Yavapai people and ancestral Hopi people, and they're called out by name in the stories. So they say that we had these relationships with Yavapai people, and we had separate relationships with Apache folks as well. So I think they do distinguish. Yes, sir.
Of the burnt bodies, remains of them, were they genetically matched to the Hopi?
I don't know that. The National Park Service does not genetically test human remains. That's not something that we're allowed to do, and that is in part because the tribes don't want us to do that. Destructive analysis on human remains is a big no-no for us, so that wasn't done.
Well, were they able to match them to the Hopi through their skeletal structures and all that?
No. No. Any other questions? Yes?
So here's a question you probably cannot, may not answer. What sorts of materials did your interviewees ask to be redacted?
That's right. No, I don't